We have several significant RFA signings to discuss today, including Troy Terry, Ryan McLeod, Rasmus Kupari, and more. We'll discuss all the latest RFA deals coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a lot of NHL news to get caught up on here today. Several RFA signings. All of our arbitration cases are now settled, which we still have some RFAs out there that are needing new deals, but they are players who do not have arbitration rights. So today with the signings we're going to discuss, we'll bring an end to anybody who was waiting for an arbitration hearing. Well, all these other players are settled ahead of time. The biggest one of the day is the Anaheim Ducks and forward Troy Terry coming to terms on a massive 7-year deal. $49 million contract total, so a $7 million average annual value. So we know going into arbitration, Troy Terry had submitted for $8 million and the team was as low as $4.5 million. That was a big gap to close. We knew the team likely knew they weren't going to get anywhere near 4.5, and I think Troy Terry knew he probably wasn't going to get 8, but obviously considering how many years they bought up here in the contract, getting him to 7, I think is a pretty good deal. To be honest, he's had back-to-back 60-point seasons. His goal totals last year were down. 2 years ago, he scored 37 and really had a breakout year. Last year, he had 23, which was obviously a good drop. He played a couple of games less, but nothing significant. His assist numbers, though, were up, so he still had similar point totals. So obviously, overall, the production was very much comparable. So back-to-back 60-point seasons. He's been in the organization for a fair bit of time now, I think 6-7 years. Obviously went through college and has played his way up into developing into a big part of their future and their current present team here. So obviously this Troy Terry deal at $7 million per season, I think will be decent. If he can be a consistent 20 to 30 goal guy, then this contract is going to age well. It's going to take him into his early 30s, and we'll see how things work out. But I think with the cap rising over the next few years, this contract should be just fine. It buys up 2 more restricted free agent years, so that would have arbitration rights, and then 5 UFA years. So considering how many UFA years they're buying, this is good value. He also gets a 10-team no-trade clause, which he's not eligible for just yet. That won't kick into the 3rd year of the contract until the 7th year. So from years 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, he'll have a 10-team no-trade. So I don't mind those modified no-trades where they can block a handful of teams. That still gives a large access around the league should a trade be something that they need to really seriously consider. But overall, I think this is a great deal for Terry and the Ducks, and they settle ahead of arbitration to avoid that nasty hearing. So I think long term it's just much better for both sides. Like I said, you can say the player probably won out on this case, a lot closer to the number that he was looking for than the team, but also a lot longer term number of years as well. They probably settled on the fact that if we're going to give you this much money, we need a long-term commitment. It's just that simple. So that should age well for the Ducks. So they still need to sign Trevor Zegras. The Troy Terry contract now gets them above the salary cap floor. They still have all kinds of space. But Zegras, who does not have arbitration rights just yet, he'll still need a little bit more experience, and before that'll happen, that'll be available on his next contract. We'll see if they go long-term with Zegras. Obviously, if they go long-term, then he may not be an RFA anymore because they may go into his UFA years. It just depends on what kind of contract they come to terms with. But one more deal for Pat Verbeek and the Ducks to look after, and I would suspect they'd probably prefer to go long-term because, as some people say, it's never going to get cheaper for them to sign these guys. They're only going to continue to develop and get better year after year. Now, we also saw another deal in Pittsburgh, which avoids arbitration, and that's the Penguins coming to terms with forward Drew O'Connor. He gets a 2-year contract, $925,000, so not a huge deal for them to settle on that. This is also a case where the Penguins have now completed their RFA business, and where they had a player file for arbitration, they now get a buyout window. So this Pittsburgh Penguin buyout window is pretty much, I think, a guarantee. It's close to it, I think, to be used. They will have the buyout window open in 3 days' time, and it'll be open for 48 hours. Now, the conditions here is that whoever they buy out, if they choose to do so, has to be on the NHL roster as of the last trade deadline. So anybody they've signed or brought into the team new this summer cannot be bought out, and the player has to be making at least $4 million. So the most obvious candidate is Michael Granlund, and Jeff Petry's the second most likely. Obviously, they want to free up some money to likely go after Erik Karlsson, maybe Noah Hannafin. They definitely want to add on the back end, and I think that they need to free up some space because not both of those guys are not tradable. I don't think they might be able to move one, but not both. And if they're going to have to add sweeteners, that's getting too crazy. So Kyle Dubas can get bigger bang for his buck by buying out Granlund. So we'll see if they decide to use that. We'll know by the end of the week or this weekend what their options are going to be. The Winnipeg Jets have come to terms with Rasmus Kupari. Of course, he was one of the pieces that came from the Jets in the Pierre-Luc Dubois trade earlier this offseason. Obviously, they also got Gabe Vilardi, who was like the centerpiece, you could say. And he came to terms with the Jets earlier already in July. But Rasmus Kupari, though, gets a 2-year contract with a $1 million average annual value. During his time in the NHL with LA, he mostly played a bottom six role. I would suspect in Winnipeg, he'll likely be, it's hard to say, he'll either be third or fourth line, most likely, probably in a similar capacity. So we'll see. That's definitely more than a fair contract. And of course, last night, the RFA, wagon kind of got going with a Ryan McLeod deal in Edmonton. They avoided arbitration as well. They were set to head to arbitration there shortly. So between McLeod, Troy Terry, Drew O'Connor, that gets all of the RFA arbitration people sorted after what we've seen here in the past couple of days. So the Oilers agree with McLeod on a 2-year deal at $2.1 million. So that's a pretty decent value, especially for a 2-year contract. At least McLeod won't have to worry about this next year. Obviously, next year he can do an extension, but obviously he's done some short-term deals since his rookie contract was completed. The Oilers still need to sign Evan Bouchard, so that leaves them with around $3.5 million space to do so. Difficult to say if they can agree to terms with Bouchard on maybe a 1-year deal at that amount or right around that amount. That would probably be ideal. I know the Oilers and Bouchard are likely but prefer to do a long-term deal. There's just no space to do it. But where he doesn't even have arbitration rights just yet, he did have a good season last year, especially after they moved Tyson Barrie running the power play, racked up a lot of points near the end of the year. But I think hopefully that they can work things out to do a shorter-term deal, 1 year, make the cap work, and then extend in the second half of the year or next offseason for a much more lucrative long-term contract as long as things continue to go well. I think that really makes a ton of sense. We also got word that former NHL prospect Mitchell Miller has signed to play over in the Slovakian League with HK32, I think the name of the team is. He didn't play at all last year. Of course, Miller was originally drafted a couple of years ago by the Arizona Coyotes, and then that draft pick was rescinded by the Coyotes, and they decided to part ways, and we're not going to be moving forward with him in the organization as a prospect, of course, because of his past. I'm not going to get into Miller and what he was accused and found guilty of before, but it was certainly some heinous stuff against one of his classmates when, yes, he was much younger, but it's still haunting him, and he's still not at a point where teams are willing to overlook what happened when he was younger. So Miller was then signed to an ELC by the Boston Bruins near the beginning of this year's season that just ended. And Bruins players did not take kindly to it. A lot of the veteran players especially spoke out publicly against the idea, and Don Sweeney and Cam Neely ended up terminating the contract. So they had to come to a mutual termination agreement with Miller, so it is believed, obviously, that he likely would have got paid out something. Like I said before, the way his ELC was structured, he was guaranteed at least an American Hockey League salary for the 3-year deal. He had opportunity to earn more money should he get NHL time or certainly qualify for rookie bonuses and things like that. But of course, it's difficult to say if he ever would have gotten any of that because there was no guarantees at all. I suspect that the whatever payout he was reached with the Bruins likely was, I'm going to say, it was likely in the equivalent of what he would have made as an AHL player. But because of everything that went down and the response and the controversy and the Bruins getting cold feet and kind of backing away from him after they signed the deal, he didn't get to play anywhere last year. So he'll head to Europe, which is what was suspected. He'll play in Slovakia. I would imagine at some point in the future, if he continues to show that he's a really good hockey player and if he can do the right things to show that satisfied teams that he's learned from his mistake and matured, then maybe he'll get another opportunity down the road. It's difficult to say, but obviously the young man still having his past haunt him for what happened a number of years back. So that's all your signing news for today. There's plenty of other stuff going on around the NHL. I'm working on another video as well that'll come out here later this evening. Lots of other things to talk about around the NHL, including a potential big update around the 2018 World Junior Championship. Canadian team had obviously a big investigation that's been going on for over a year. There could be some suspensions coming. We're going to discuss that, as well as some other trade talk and other rumors from around the NHL. So stay tuned for that in a few hours' time. If you're new to the channel, though, make sure you subscribe and stick around so you don't miss any future content. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you next time.